Welcome to the all-new, almost, F65 four-door Mini Cooper. Five-door, for those of you who are in Europe. In the US, it's called four doors. But we're here to talk about what has changed in this car and what has not. So this is obviously a derivative of the two-door, or three-door, hardtop. That's the sort of quintessential Mini Cooper. This, of course, has sprouted a pair of extra doors, giving the car a little bit more utility. And so we have driven the F66, which is, of course, that two-door hardtop several times, and we wanted to see what is really different about this car besides the two doors. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but what feels different from a driving perspective? Is this the car that you should buy over that two-door? Or are there limitations to what this car can do from a driving perspective that just make it a little less fun? So we just twisted the key, if you will, the electric key, and we're going to take this out and see what it can do. Okay, we are off into the Carolina sunset here. We are actually just leaving the BMW Performance Center. It's where this press event is taking place, and this is a really interesting time for Mini when you consider the fact that they have completely reintroduced their entire lineup. I mean, this is, while you could argue not effectively a new car, everything in the product line sort of appears new technology throughout, new exterior design, and it looks like an evolution to some people, but others who are big Mini fans will recognize this is a big change for the brand. So there's some things that are I would say cleaned up and look fantastic. There are other things that, quite frankly, are a little controversial. So certainly an interesting time for the brand. Now, this car, again, this is the four-door. It's got an extra pair of doors in the back, but otherwise it's generally unchanged. There's a couple key differences, though, even if you're the driver of the four-door Mini, that you will notice right away. One of them is the size of the door. Quite literally, the entry into this car is quite a bit smaller to, of course, accommodate for the rear doors. So everything has been kind of pushed forward. The seating position is the same. So that introduces an interesting sort of, I guess, conundrum for Mini, because you've changed the size of the entry to the vehicle, but you've made the seating position still as sort of comfortable as it was before. I'm 6'2", and I have plenty of room in this car, and I'd say traditionally I never put the seat all the way back. It's way too far back for me, even at 6'2", if it's all the way back. And so incredibly comfortable. However, when I go in and out of this car, I have to remind myself that this B-pillar is right here versus about 3 inches back. And so is it hard to get in and out? No, not at all. But you need to just build that muscle memory so it doesn't become a problem, because I can tell you I have absolutely hit my head, shoulder on this car from time to time trying to get in and out, just because I wasn't used to it. Not a big deal, though. Again, once you get used to it, not a big deal. And of course, if you're not 6'2", it's infinitely easier. The rear seats are small. There's no question about it. And so to prove that point, let's take a look at what I look like with me in the front of this car sitting in back. Okay, so here I am in the back seat of this car, and as you can see, let's be real, it's tight. Size 13 feet, barely fit in there. This is really tough, to be honest with you, but it's doable. And I think that's kind of the trick here, is that this is a car that it is a four-door, and there is space for four people, which does actually make it more accessible for a lot of folks. So, is it perfect? No, but at the same time, it's infinitely better than that two-door. So let's get back in the driver's seat. So not a ton of room, clearly, but doable. And I think that's the thing with this car. I mean, this is the way for somebody who doesn't want a Countryman. I want a small Mini. I want a Cooper. I want the feel that the Cooper gives you. But at the same time, I want a little bit of extra room. I want a little bit of extra utility. And for my money, I think it's a really nice. I think it's a really nice sort of middle ground, if you will, with these cars. So it is a Cooper, as I mentioned earlier, and because of that, you have the same sort of feel as that two-door, but it's a little bit more grown up. So let's put it in go-kart mode, and let's go ahead and turn off that terrible jingle. I mean, it's one of the worst things that Mini has done in a long time. I love what Mini has done with its operating system. Is fantastic. I think what Mini has done with I'd say the interior conceptually is excellent. This is, of course, all carryover from what we see in the Cooper, the two-door Cooper, and it is very similar to what we see in the Countryman. But, the one element that a lot of people are sort of struggling with, or at least commenting on, is the cloth dash and the cloth on the door cards. Again, conceptually, I like what they've done a lot. It's challenging for a lot of people because you look at it and you wonder, and this is the sort of lighter gray, how in the world is this not going to get dirty? And it probably will from time to time. I've been told by numerous people at Mini, some of which, were off the record telling me that they weren't sure how it was going to really be. They weren't responsible for designing or engineering it, but they just sort of have experienced it. And they've all said it's very easy to clean. Wet, damp cloth, not a big deal. It's not something that you should really be concerned about. Of course, it's recycled material. It is recyclable, which is great. And I think it adds texture, quite literally, but it adds sort of an interesting kind of character to the car. That said, from a critique standpoint, there's no question that the plastics beyond this fabric are harder, are less premium looking. And I think that's unfortunate because as much as this fabric does cover a lot of the interior, it doesn't cover all of it. And you still have plastic down here in the door, which feels quite a bit cheaper than before. And so, this isn't a luxury car. There's no way around that. But it is, unfortunately, it feels like it's taken a step back in a couple spots within the interior, as it's taken a couple steps forward. OS 9 with this round display is incredible, and I think it's something that is worth really, I'd say celebrating in a lot of ways, that Mini has gone through that trouble to create something that's very unique to the brand. They could have easily had something that looked like a BMW. They could have just thrown a big rectangle screen in front of us and called it a day, and that's not the case at all with this car. So it's worth celebrating, in my opinion, and I think this car is better for it for sure. The F65 four-door hardtop Mini Cooper is a car that tries to thread the needle. Is it perfect for everybody? Absolutely not. But what I think is interesting about it is it gives you the ability to have that Mini Cooper experience that so many people want, while still having a little bit more utility. The four doors is a legitimate positive for folks who do need, in a pinch, to throw some people in the back. Or if you have small children, it is doable. Now, a rear-facing car seat might be a little tricky, but it is doable. And I think that's the thing that's really beneficial for a lot of folks who, are looking at Minis. A lot of people just don't want to have a Countryman. They have grown quite a bit larger, and I think that's actually good for Mini. It does open up new markets and new opportunities for people to buy them. But it has made the car, let's be honest, less sort of historically Mini-like, just because of its size and its weight. And this car tries to split that gap. It is a flawed car. There's no question about it, because you cannot put four people. I should say it's a flawed four-door. You can't put four people in this car all the time unless they are very small. And so there is an inherent flaw there if you're trying to do that. But it's kind of the perfect car if you really are typically just two people or maybe one person in the car, but you want a little bit more utility. Even with the seats down, the boot is larger, which is great for a lot of folks. And I think about, just somebody with a dog or two, a couple with a dog. This car works perfectly. There's now space in the back, doors to get the dog in and out. There's a lot of scenarios where this car really makes sense. For me, personally, I have a hard time seeing why this car existed, historically speaking, when the Clubman was around. It didn't really make sense, because the Clubman, to me, possessed almost the same feel, much more power if you could get the JCW, and a lot more utility. I think it looked better as well. The rear of this car, I've never been a fan of the sort of sloping back. But with the Clubman gone, This car makes a lot more sense as that middle ground, bridging that gap between the Countryman and the hardtop. And I think this car is going to do really well in the U.S. I'm surprised that in some ways it is still around. You think that many would have replaced it with a small crossover until you realize they have. The Mini Aceman is exactly that car. It's electric only, and because of that, it's limited in some markets. And of course, it's not even sold in the U.S. because it is currently produced in China, and the tariffs are just sort of a non-starter for many from a business case perspective. And so what's interesting when you consider that car is it's pretty much identical in terms of size to this car. Same remit in a lot of ways. Small four-door, not a lot of room in the back, but in a pinch it works really well. In fact, it has a little bit more room than this car inside. But of course, it's a sort of quote-unquote crossover. It's a little taller, not much, and it's fully electric. So, this is a car that's sticking around because that car cannot come to the United States, and Mini does want to have an ICE vehicle that can be sold in this segment for as long as possible. So that's why we have it, and quite frankly, I think it's a good thing that Mini has kept it around. I think it's going to find a lot of buyers this generation without the Clubman in the lineup. And with the Countryman growing larger, it suddenly comes into focus as, I would say, a car with maybe a little bit more purpose than before.